Yo! Greetings ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the next part of the Crash Bandicoot Retrospective. Let's jump right into it. So, the sales numbers for Crash of the Titans was decent, or at least it was certainly much better than that of Twinsanity's. And notably, the game came out on PS2, Xbox 360, PSP, and Wii, which meant it had a lot of potential buyers. There was also a Game Boy Advance and DS version, but those were both completely different games, so we'll leave those alone for now. But regardless, if you remember, if we combine the estimated sales of Crash Twinsanity's PS2 and Xbox releases, you get about 0.79 million units sold. So what happens when you combine the PS2, Wii, 360, and PSP sales of Crash of the Titans together? You get just about 1.82 million in sales. Is that reaching the peak in franchise numbers? No. Did any one console sell a crazy amount of units? No. But it is still more than double of that of Twinsanity's. So clearly, regardless of opinions about the game, which in case you were wondering, were fairly mixed when the game came out, the game still sold quite well. And so it seemed to everyone involved that this was the best direction to take the franchise going forward. And so we would end up getting a direct sequel, both story and gameplay wise, to Crash of the Titans, in the form of Crash Mind Over Mutant.
Nobody's safe as an evil villain attempts to take over the world in ways you've never imagined. It will take a hero to battle brainwashed friends, powerful enemies, and even romance. Well, maybe not.
See if Crash can save his friends from Dr. Cortex's evil mind-controlling plot, all as you take on the biggest, baddest mutants ever, and even hijack monsters and store them in your pocket to pull them out when you need them.
Crash Bandicoot, Mind Over Mutant!
Development on Crash Mind Over Mutant began immediately after the completion of Crash of the Titans, with it being developed and released literally 1 year after Titans' release, almost to the day in October. Unlike before, some of the members from the Crash Mania forum interviewed Radical Entertainment sometime before the game's release, and several staff members and developers would come to answer their questions, which I think is pretty damn cool. It was quite evident that Radical Entertainment, or at least the people that were working on the Crash Bandicoot games at that given point in time, were very dedicated to the community, and some of the more interesting questions that were asked in regards to the sequel coming out were, quote, how did you decide what to improve and what to keep the same? To which Joe McGinn, lead designer, answered, we started this game immediately after Titans, so there were a lot of great ideas that we just hadn't managed to squeeze into the last game. For example, we were pleased by how much our playtesters liked the Titans, and it was obvious that they didn't like leaving them behind after winning an epic battle with them. So that concept of keeping your Titans became a priority for Mind Over Mutant. Our other source of inspiration is the fans. We know that you've wanted to play as Coco for a while. We've seen all the requests for free romping level design. We know you love the old characters like in Brio. We can't fit everything in each game, but our job is basically to make you happy. Pretty sweet, huh? Another question was, are there bosses again? If so, are they fought the same way as the previous game? Jacking mutants, stunning the boss, jacking the boss. To which again, Joe McGinn answered, there are still jackable bosses, but the design philosophy behind boss battles in Mind Over Mutant is quite different. Each boss is kind of a puzzle for a Titan's power that you have acquired and used by that point in the game. The challenge is to figure out how to use that power to your advantage. So the boss challenges are more intelligent this year, rather than just the peak combat skills they required in Titans. Another question was, free romping is one of the most awaited features in the game, in which significant ways do you think it will affect the overall gameplay? Which Des Hinkson, lead level designer, answered, free romping. Oh that. Yes, that will change things quite a bit. Basically, we've thrown away the restrictions of past games where you could only play with Crash through areas from start to finish. Instead, we've opened up the world for you to explore. It works like this. As you play, you'll come across forks in your path. The hub areas all over where you can decide where you want to go. You might even decide to go back and find a mutant that you want to pocket for a fight, or a puzzle you noticed. Sometimes you'll come across a dead end that requires you to solve a problem elsewhere before you can get past it. You can choose to follow the story and see where it leads you, or ignore the story for a while and explore the way you want. Crash's world has become a living, breathing world, with events happening in different parts of the world, whether you are there or not. That means that your existence in each part of the game will be a little different when you explore them at different times. Crash will be romping like he's never romped before, and I think you'll be pleased about how freely things change from romp to romp. And for one more question, Crash of the Titans had a large predominance of combat over platforming, as it was one of the game's showcase features. Does one aspect win over the other in this game? If so, which one? Which again, Joe McGinn answered, the combat is refined and improved and still plays a role, but we've made a conscious effort to expand non-combat gameplay opportunities. This means things like using enemy powers to solve puzzles, and Crash's new platforming moves. Crash of the Titans had about a 70-30 combat to platform split. In Mind Over Mutant, we've achieved closer to a 50-50, which we hope will please all our fans. Unquote. So some interesting things can be gleaned from this. The first of which being that new free romping gameplay they describe. Basically, it sounds like exploration plays a bigger role in this game, or at least that's the idea, with more optional side content. The bosses perhaps actually being bosses this time around is something that could improve the game a fair bit. Not to mention, if they are telling the truth about the game being more 50-50 with platforming and combat, maybe there will actually be some challenge in the platforming department. They also said that they refined the combat. Could they have perhaps made more moves? Made it more dynamic? Interesting? Could it perhaps not be mind-numbingly boring now? The Titans being able to interact with the environment more also sounds promising. But the thing is, did they deliver on any of this? Does Crash Mind Over Mutant improve on Crash of the Titans? Does it fix many of the issues I had with the game and make it a more interesting, less gimmicky experience? Did they really make a bunch of side content? Can you really play the game in your own way and not just follow down a direct path that tells you where to go in the story? Or is this just all window dressing for what is ultimately just another mediocre to really boring ass character action game that just can't... Well, let's talk about it.
The story of Crash Mind Over Mutant is, basically, I tell that stupid fucking mask to go take a hike, and I plug him into my fetish demon milking device to make him remember who's really in charge around here. And that's not all. Then I give Coco and Crunch Bandicoot some VR headsets and use that to psyop them into being mindless drones for my glorious army. And then I hire Dr. Embryo back to help me in my plan for world domination, since he clearly had nothing better to do. And he missed the spotlight being next to me, provided him. Oh, anyone would. And so that's that! I have a plan to indoctrinate the whole planet now. And if Crash wants to come and stop me, then, well, he probably will. Oh, God, sometimes, chat, I just want to die. Oh, but I can't. Unless I take some people with me!
So yeah, Crash Mind Over Mutant has a pretty interesting plot setup. But more than that, the way this game presents the story is genuinely charming and fun. That being that every major cutscene in the game is presented in a different art style, and all of which are animated. I absolutely love this idea, and it's without a question the best part of the whole game. Not to mention that the humor in some of these is just so fucking great. I especially love everything they did with Dr. Embryo, who had been pretty absent from the games for some time at this point, with his wordless appearance into insanity being the only one. They do change his personality, I will say right now though, but I honestly really like the direction they went in. They take that story beat from the first Crash Bandicoot's instruction manual that Embryo was actually the one who created the Evolvo Ray that Cortex just took credit for, and gave him a whole fucking complex about it.
I've made up with an old colleague. Join me in welcoming Nitrous Brio!
Yes, it is I, Embryo. My name sounds like fetus. No doubt you all remember me as the creator of the Evolvo Ray.
That was him? I thought Cortex did that.
Of course it was me. I invented the Evolvo Ray and mutagenetic techniques still used by that treacherous Cortex today. I was in the first game! Lovely mutagen. So good.
They then take this several steps further by having him rant about how he invented a bunch of other things, including the Bible.
The NV!
That looks totally awesome. I designed it and I want 4 of them.
I will destroy you for this, Cortex. Your life is forfeit.
Oh my. Talk about a two-dimensional bad guy.
Yes. I wrote that line earlier. Greetings, little peons, which I invented. You see before you a glorious history of evil devices that me, invented. Over time, the disgusting heroes of this world, which I invented, me, not Cortex, read your Bible, I wrote it. Heroes like lazy bandicoots just leave these wonderful toys to rot where they fall. But Dr. Cortex, who says he invented many things, liar, says, hurry, build me a space head and many NV devices. So, I have invented recycling! Remember the Embryo patented phrase, reuse, recycle, revenge! I created Slinkies! Stop playing with them because they're mine! You see before you an ocean of wrecked dreams, my dreams. From this ocean, Dr. Cortex has asked me to harpoon the white whale of evil. Recycling shall destroy the world, and I, as its inventor, shall get the credit. Look, Light Bright, I didn't invent this. Bert Meyer did. It's not evil. Why is it in the pile? Cortex and I are in charge now, little fool. And your island is trapped by a device that
you invented, yeah.
This isn't the end. I invented endings. Why don't people take me seriously?
This is just one of those concepts I can tell that the writers came up with, and were laughing about how absurd it is and wondering how far they could take it. And I honestly really appreciate it. It weirdly feels like an abridged or fan-dubbed version of the character, taking one element and extending it to such a degree that it's just crazy and comical. And normally that could be kind of irritating or really one note, but since this is a really short game and there's only a few cutscenes with Brio in it, it works pretty well here. I also like that Cortex immediately betrays Uka Uka and takes back his role as the main villain. I suppose it was only fair since he was demoted to side gag in the last game. He also gets several great moments throughout this game story-wise as well, showcasing his personality and this game's sense of humor.
There was a piece of lettuce in the urinal. Who eats a sandwich while going to the bathroom? Seriously. Anywho.
Cortex, you miserable traitor! I will have my revenge!
Fabulous. He's never looked better. Rubenesque even. I was so tired of that guy. Felt like I married my mother. Not that I've thought about that.
Stealing my mojo to power your envies. That's low even for you. But why do you keep feeding me cake?
Oh, that. I just thought it would be mean. Seriously, you're never going to be able to eat cake again. Imagine that. Life without cake.
You fiend!
Nina has a far smaller role this time, but I will also say that they managed to get a fair bit of use out of her as well, with this joke about her being, well...
Oh, so you need my help? That's so cute. Don't hurt your butt on the way out the door.
Please, Nina. We'll do anything.
Anything? Really?
Yes.
Kiss.
What?
Yeah. Kiss. Right now. It will amuse me.
Fucking Fujoshi, I guess. At any rate, though, all the characters get moments to shine here. And if you haven't noticed, even more tongue-in-cheek with their adult humor. Hell, Uka Uka actually is straight up fucking put into a mojo milking machine, which is, white colored. Huh. You know, I didn't mention it earlier, but Cortex in the last game also made this comment about Crash and Coco getting a room. Why would he say that? They're brother and sister, which is then followed up again by this joke.
I'm still going to spank you stupid for this.
Oh.
Huh. Cortex is, he's a little bit fucking weird in these games, huh? Add that with what he did to Uka Uka and, well, I'd say it's a fair observation that Cortex is just a little bit, fucking sus in these games. Beyond all that, though, the evil hypnotized versions of Crunch and Coco could have been utilized a fair bit more than what they were in the game. The concept of them getting hypnotized through a VR headset is pretty funny. Also, they randomly changed the design of Coco again. I mean, her design in Titans was fine. I'm not really sure why they changed her so drastically here. I guess this one is also fine, but still kind of random. Oh, and they did the same thing for Crunch, who, it looks okay, I guess. A lot more mean looking. Oh, and they also changed Crash, and, I'm not fucking feeling it. They gave him jean shorts now, and elongated his body, or at least his limbs, which makes him look just off to me. What I said before about him feeling DeviantArtistified is even stronger now. Though I guess being fair, as far as cutscenes go, every character goes through such dramatic changes as their designs reflect the art style, so at least there's that. It is genuinely fun getting to see all the character designs change from art style to art style. Still, it doesn't change the fact that you're going to be looking at Crash most of the game, and he just looks even stranger here. I honestly would have preferred if they just kind of kept with the original Crash of the Titans design for him. Also, random side note, but is there actually anyone who likes the fucking tribal tattoos on Crash's hands over those sick fingerless gloves he had on before? I know there are people that think the tribal tattoos are kind of alright, but do you really like them over the cool fucking gloves? Hashtag put the fucking gloves back on. Also, another side note, but holy fuck, this game cover I smashed earlier is ugly as sin. Look at the detail work on Crash's fur. The details in the gums that look weirdly out of place with the ultra-realistic painting style of his fur. The ugly fucking eyebrow ridges Crash has here for some reason. That the more I look at, the more fucking disgusting they look. This motherfucker really looks like an orange rat here, taking it from all sides from these Titan creatures. Did somebody call Ken Penders into the studio that day, or fucking what? Nasty as shit, man. I hate having it sit in the same room as me. What was I talking about? Oh yeah. The story of this game is pretty fun overall, though it is remarkably short and feels pretty rushed by its end. Much like the game in general, actually, which, speaking of, let's talk about the gameplay and those changes made to the formula here. So, I'm gonna save us a lot of time here by first saying that any issues I had with Crash of the Titans, from Crash's moveset not being interesting and lacking any creativity, with integrating any of his cool platforming moveset into the combat moves, the Titan jacking mechanic and gameplay being gimmicky, while fun at times, is ultimately pretty boring and tired after a while, and just in general the gameplay not being very interesting and a hollow experience, all still very much apply here in this game. This one really isn't trying to break the mold of the first one. It really is just an iteration of that game, and if you like Crash of the Titans, you're probably gonna like Crash Mind Over Mutant because it is so much more the same, and vice versa, if you weren't that big of a fan of Crash of the Titans, you're probably not gonna be that big of a fan of Mind Over Mutant. However, there are some positive changes, and some, just changes in general worth noting in this game, not necessarily positive or negative, in my opinion. The first one is that you can now save a Titan in your pocket. So you can beat up a Titan, jack them, and then when you need to use a different Titan, or gotta do some normal platforming or something like that, but also really like using this one that you've been using, you can save it, jack another one, and then go back to using your older one. Following this mechanic, you can also level up Titans in this game, making them stronger, with the idea being that you can keep using your favorite Titan throughout the whole game to carry you through, if you so wish, besides the times when you absolutely have to use one of the Titans for a platforming section or a boss battle. This mechanic is alright. I wouldn't say it's an improvement, but it's not bad either. I think the reason I feel like it's kind of not an improvement, even though I'm sure many would disagree, is because ultimately all it really means is the game is easier if you want to bring Titans into areas to defeat other Titans faster. At the same time though, this game in general is way easier than Crash of the Titans, with those annoying moments where multiple Titans would be on your Bandicoot ass at once being far less aggressive, as well as defeating Titans pretty much being just an easier task overall in this game. And it was already a pretty damn easy task in Crash of the Titans, again, unless there was multiple Titans in an area, notably on hard difficulty. As a matter of fact, I can't say a single place in this game ever really challenged me. Not that that is necessarily a inherently good or bad thing, I just found this game pretty breezy as an experience. So much so that the whole pocketed Titan mechanic, I felt just made the game honestly, well, even more boring. I do like the idea of them being leveled up though, and I think it is ultimately a better execution of what they're trying to go for with Crash of the Titans, but also at the end of the day, you're still playing as the Titans most of the time, which means regardless of the Titan that you're using, basically just means one-shotting enemies and trivializing combat encounters. Not to mention taking away any combo abilities that you normally would have with Crash, not that there is a whole lot, but there's at least a few more in Crash Mind Over Mutant, in exchange for a basic 3-hit combo, or a really powerful ability that again, just kind of reveals how hollow the combat system is in this game, even more so. Again, I don't want to repeat myself too much since I pretty much went on a whole rant about it in the Crash of the Titans video, but if Radical Entertainment's goal was to make a character action game, I really think it would have been a better direction to have Crash have a much more fluid sort of combat system, and to overall rely far less on the gimmicky mechanic of Titans. Still, the mechanic of pocketing a Titan doesn't necessarily hurt the game at all, so whatever. On the positive side of things though, I will say there are way more times where you actually get to use the Titans for platforming encounters, which I did enjoy. There's also just a lot more platforming gameplay in general. Again, none of them are particularly difficult or all that interesting, but still I do personally find the platforming to combat ratio to be much better in this game versus Crash of the Titans. It did make the game much more palatable to me. The other big difference gameplay-wise in this game is the open world design. Well, kinda. See, Crash's home and the Wumpa Island beach are kind of like a main hub for you, and it's here you can take several different paths to the other parts of the game, kind of like Jak and Daxter, if it was only the size of one hub world and wasn't nearly as good. Mind you that while this hub is pretty open and there are a few places like this in the game, for the most part, the game is still going down linear paths. Still, it is much more open than any other Crash game thus far, and there are even a few times where the levels loop around to get you back to Wumpa Island in a kind of fun way, all of which is pretty damn cool. However, it too has some major flaws. That being how often the game also does not have the levels loop around on themselves, or have a shortcut open up or something like that, and instead just have you backtrack through the level you just went through. Mind you, the backtracking in of itself isn't the bad part, though it can get pretty bad in a few sections of the game. It really is that because the game had me going at first with the first major level you go through, ending with you ending back where you started, back in the Wumpa Island hub. And as the game goes on, the less they do this, and the more backtracking through areas you've already been through there ultimately is. And there's never anything new or interesting to do in these areas, despite that being something that the developers mentioned in the interview. Outside of one particular quest near the very end of the game, the areas don't really change in any meaningful way. You just basically play the same linear section, but backwards. It's the gaming equivalent of dead air. And it's not the biggest deal in the world, but honestly, with how often you replay sections in this game, you start to really grasp just how little new game there actually is, with the game being able to be beaten in about 4 hours. And that was with me fucking around, not exactly knowing what I had to do at a few points in the game, not to mention near the very end of the game, you gotta defeat 3 Titan heroes, which is the quest I alluded to earlier, changing a few sections of the world and adding in a section for you to go through, which again are just 3 Titans with extra health that have Uka Uka's bones. Don't ask why they have those. And this quest takes you back through other areas of the game all over again, just to find a newly added path in these places that were not there before, which again is not the end of the world, but it really made me realize, even just through my first playthrough, how much of this game is filled to the brim with padding. In fact, there are actually only 8 main levels in the game, 7 if you don't count Wumpa Island since it's just a hub. So besides that one, there is the Ratsicle Kingdom, Ice Prison, Wasteland, Evil Public School, Junkyard, Mount Grimley, and Spacehead being the finale level. Now mind you, I don't think that this is also inherently a bad thing. After all, in Crash to Insanity, there's also only a few specific locations, but many of those locations were very cool and filled with a lot of personality. And I can certainly say the same thing about the locations in Crash Mind Over Mutant. They all look extremely cool, very striking, with Mount Grimley definitely being my favorite, with its dark halls and a sort of gothic, spooky atmosphere. I'm just a sucker for that sort of aesthetic anyway, but here it was particularly quite nice. I also really like that you can actually walk around Crash & Co.'s home in this one, a feature I had been hoping for some time now. Though it is a pretty small space, you can check out concept art and other behind-the-scenes stuff in the game that you can unlock here, which I always really fucking appreciate, as a bonus for collecting stuff in these games. Which seems to have been a serious tradition for the most part ever since they first started it with the scrapbook in Crash Team Racing, though we'll talk about that in detail another time. But overall, it's pretty damn cool. There's also this little fan art section which shows several kids' drawings of Crash Bandicoot, which I believe you could actually get into the game through a contest at the time, which I think was a really cool thing to include in the game. Once again, showcasing Radical Entertainment's dedication to the fanbase, if nothing else. As far as visuals go, they for sure did quality over quantity here, and in general, these levels are much more fun and interesting to traverse through than Crash of the Titans. However, they're also far shorter, and you end up having to backtrack through them several times, which kind of makes a few of them really overstay their welcome. The game is also structured in a mission-based format, with you having this mission log that is, I'm gonna be real, just completely useless, because you're never doing more than one thing at a time, and there's no way to say play Mission 12 before Mission 9 or some shit. Maybe it was more of a means of just reminding you of where you need to go next. But again, with how they talked about the game having sections where you can just stop following the story and do something else, it makes it seem like there is going to be times where there's going to be side quests or something. And there just really isn't. I mean, there's side quests as in collecting things and doing certain things you probably were going to do anyway along the way of playing the game, but there's not, say, like some kind of fetch quest that you do for a certain character in an area. There's not a side quest that leads to a new area exclusive to that side quest. There's not a mini game or any sort of other extra content here. It's all just kind of window dressing. Add that with the fact that there's almost no new Titans in this game, which is wild since that kind of is the whole fucking game at this point, with the exception of the TK and Grimly Titans. All the rest of them are just ones from Crash of the Titans. Though, they do have all new models, I guess. Still, it just feels like there's even less new content even in that regard. You know, it does make me wonder though, had there been a third Crash of the Titans type game, if they were eventually going to let you combine Titans or like customize your own Titan or something like that. It feels like things were going to eventually move in that direction if they had continued down this path. Anyway, they do all at least look pretty nice as far as monster designs go, but again, not much in the department of new content to really discuss. They had 1 year to make this game, and boy howdy, does it ever feel like it, with so much of it just being more Crash of the Titans, but with a different level structure and a couple of new additions gameplay-wise. And I thought Crash of the Titans was fucking dog water, so it only stands to reason that this game is also kind of dog water too, but like with a little less dog? The metaphor is breaking down. This game is also really hollow and boring as fuck, but it is better than Crash of the Titans, in my personal opinion. After all, at least this game actually has boss fights this time around, which, speaking of, the first of which being a fight with the mind-controlled Coco on this basketball shooting machine. It's alright, if super easy, where you use the Ratsicle Titan to knock the basketballs back at her until she fires a basketball of fire from it, which you then hit back, causing her to burn, jumps in a pool of water, you then freeze the water with the Titan's ice powers, and then hit her to take health off of her. Like I said, pretty simple, but I already love that you have to use a Titan's abilities to fight a boss. This is already leagues better than literally every other boss encounter in Crash of the Titans. Next, if you want to count it as a boss, would be the Scorporilla fight, which is just a jack a big Titan to kill smaller ones affair, much like the first game. But it is a unique encounter in this game, so maybe it counts? Anyway, the next boss is the Hypnotized Crunch, under the control of Embryo. And again, it is a pretty good boss fight. You gotta use one of the two new Titans, TK, which their main ability is that they can use telekinesis. You gotta use it to toss TNT crates at the rocket launchers in the room as they are firing their weapons, kind of like an engine boss fight. Then the boss reaches phase 2, where you use your powers on Crunch to fucking throw him into a meat grinder. That's pretty cool, I guess. And then you jack off Crunch to use his ability to defeat Brio by throwing little blue balls at him or something. And strangely enough, this is where Brio just kind of leaves the story and the game as a whole, which is sad because he was the best part up until now. Not gonna lie, I kind of wish that he got to be the main villain. Like at some point after you defeat Cortex in the game, he comes back to be the main big final mutant boss, since, you know, he was the guy who actually turns into a big scary monster in the series before, and yet you never get to fight him in that form at all in this game? Seems like such a waste of potential. You just see him now jumping out of nowhere to take control of the situation once Cortex is defeated, saying that he is actually the final boss. In fact, he invented the idea of final bosses. You know, that whole shtick. But alas, we got no such thing. The next boss is just like every other boss in Crash of the Titans. You jack this big Titan and then you break all the shit in the room. Yawn, boring, next. And then there's the final boss with Cortex, which is, well, I guess it's the thought that counts. But this boss is fucking unbelievably easy, and is more of a last-minute spectacle than anything. It will continue to be a mystery to me why you are given a time slowdown titan here in this boss, where it is just then completely trivialized and you basically just get to skip the boss battle as a whole. In fact, it would have made more sense if there were multiple rounds to this boss fight, and you had to use different titans to solve the puzzle, so to speak, on how to defeat Cortex with each given round. But regardless, in the actual game, you eventually jack him off to kill a bunch of enemies with his move set before then using his body slam attack to self-destruct his own base, yada yada yada, you get the idea. Ending the game out with Cortex having a full-blown meltdown.
It's not fair! It's not fair! I want to win! It's my turn! Been trying for flipping years!
Uh-oh, Crash! I think he broke something.
Ending the game out with Crash escaping the ship and Cortex probably being fine. Now, I'll be honest with you, Crash Mind Over Mutant was a game that felt like a passing breeze you feel but for just a moment, and then it's gone. I said before that I hadn't played either of these Titan-based games until making this retrospective, and so sadly, I find myself having less to say about them in full over the previous entries. It's clear they are not my cup of tea gameplay-wise, but have some pretty fun stories and ideas. But ultimately, Mind Over Mutant as a game, I'd say, is better than Crash of the Titans. But it's also a pretty boring, mediocre experience for me personally. And again, had it not been for the Crash characters and cool cutscenes, this one really would have put my brain into autopilot. While I was playing the game with my best friend while recording footage for it, I found myself needing to talk about literally anything else other than the game because it just felt like a vacuum more often than not. Just going through the motions. It's Crash of the Titans, but a little bit better. And again, if you like or even love these games, I can understand why. And no hate or shade thrown your way at all, especially if you grew up playing them. But for me, they just do nothing. Hell, sometimes I wish that Radical Entertainment, or at least the writers and artists involved in it, was given the job of making a Crash Bandicoot cartoon series, or something like that, because when it comes to humor, style, the concepts, they're all actually very creative. And even if I don't like all the new designs, the worst part of these games is sadly the gameplay. And for me, a story can be absolutely amazing, but if that gameplay is shallow, these two games, as a whole, just feel like two missed opportunities in a row. Sales numbers wise for this game were actually pretty good when all versions of the game are taken into account, with it selling over 2 million units, about on par or slightly more than Crash of the Titans. And speaking of different versions, I guess I should also at least note the different versions of this game can be pretty damn different. In Crash of the Titans case, the Game Boy Advance game is a side-scroller that I have also yet to play, so I honestly couldn't tell you if it was decent or not. And then there's the DS version, which is also pretty different, and honestly looks like parts of the story are also fairly different as well. There's even a fucking Dingodile boss fight? Like a boss fight in general? What the fuck? Oh, and I guess the GBA version also has bosses too. Well, we'll have to talk about those ones a little bit later when we finally get into all the portable and spin-off games in this series, I guess. Same goes for Crash Mind Over Mutant, by the way, with the DS version also being a side-scroller with what looks to be a different story as well. However, as for all the other versions, including the PSP version, the game is mostly the same, with varying differences in graphics and presentation. Some of you might have noticed I used footage of the PS2 version of Crash of the Titans and the Xbox 360 version of Mind Over Mutant for the footage. This was done because Titans has a really bizarre motion blur effect on the 360 version, during gameplay that I found kind of looked like ass, so I went the PS2 version instead, whereas I didn't notice this effect in the 360 version of Mind Over Mutant, and the graphics were noticeably better in that version over the PS2 version. The PSP versions obviously have the lowest graphics of any of them, but are also pretty accurate versions of the game, and for that reason are actually pretty impressive that they got it all to fit on a PSP game. I can see why those versions in particular were so very popular sales-wise. But then we have the Wii version of the games, which of course have a major difference in that motion controls are involved. I've never played the Crash of the Titans nor Mind Over Mutant Wii versions. Even though I smashed the Wii version of Mind Over Mutant a little earlier, I never actually played either one of these games on original hardware. So I can't confirm this, but I do wonder if activating the spin move via the spinning of the analog stick, like a doofus, was done because of the Wii version you have to spin using the Wiimote to spin, doing like a spinning motion. Does it work better there? If so, I don't even know if this is true. Has anyone here ever played the Wii version of the game? Can you confirm or deny? Is that how the spinning move works in that game? I mean, in the great scheme of things, I don't really think it matters all that much, but I do wonder if the controls are at least a little more intuitive on the Wii, or if they're perhaps worse versions and the motion controls are just kind of tacked on. But anyway, I just figured I'd note these games could be pretty different across all the various platforms they landed on. But again, we'll talk about the ones that are basically new games a little bit later. After this game's release, there were rumors floating about that Radical Entertainment was making a fourth Crash game. Mind you, the first one they made was Crash Tag Team Racing. And this fourth Crash game was called Crash Landed. And indeed, this was going to be the next big installment in the Crash Bandicoot series. It's going to be developed for the Xbox 360 and PlayStation 3, which is significant because the last two games were made more with the Wii graphics level in mind, and simply upscaled for Xbox 360. While this game would have taken advantage of the more powerful console's hardware and simply made a scaled back version for Wii instead this time. However, this game would not end up coming to be, which I'll get into why in a moment. But going over some other details surrounding the game, it was going to feature music composed by Gabriel Mann and Rebecca Newble, both members of Spiral Mouth, which I'm sure many Twinsanity fans would have adored seeing a return from. According to a Crash Mania article written on the subject of the game, quote, Radical Entertainment spent a lot of time coming up with new ideas and deciding what would give Crash his old flair again. They quickly settled on a reboot of Crash's universe and story, featuring stunning cartoony graphics and a new visual style. Crash himself was planned to show a lot more emotion than the frozen grin he gained a few years prior. Some exaggerated features such as the bushy eyebrows and wacky facial expressions were reminiscent of the old days. The game was cancelled after 2 years in development. During the production of Mind Over Mutant, Activision acquired Sierra and all of its subsidiaries, which included Radical Entertainment. During a massive layoff spree in 2010, Activision shut down the Radical division in charge of Crash Landed. Activision's decision to not pass the project to a different studio suddenly halted progress forever. One factor that contributed to this decision was a certain lack of tangible results. Despite the numerous concepts, animations, and an impressive graphics engine for its time, Radical reportedly had little to show in terms of gameplay, leading Activision to decide the project was not financially viable. The fact that they were so close to the proposed release date did not help matters either. Crash Landed was to be an origin story, and it was going to be a fresh new start that retold how Crash came to be the bumbling hero we all know and love. After being mutated by Cortex, he would have gotten entangled in the task of rescuing his fellow bandicoots. Unlike Crash, these bandicoots weren't evolved by scientific contraptions, so they were still small, defenseless critters. They were internally referred to as bandicoots, and they would often be trapped in dangerous areas until Crash freed them. Besides Cortex, Dinkeldile was going to be a major villain in the game, harassing the local bandicoots by shooting them out of a cannon and using his trusty flamethrower. Notably, some entirely new characters were going to try and stop Crash on his tracks, such as a vicious land shark and the queen of a colossal firefly hive, neither of which was a mutant character, much like the small bandicoots. One of the main innovations of the game was to be an invention system. By finding and combining them together, you'll be able to craft some rudimentary yet imaginative and effective tools. For example, sticking a frog inside a plastic bottle, dubbed the Frogzooka, would let you use its tongue to eat enemies and reel in objects out of reach, or launch Crash with the use of catapults. If you had a couple extra bottles, you could fill them with fireflies and tie them together with a rope and some sticks to create a jetpack. Also planned were a hang glider and the ability to ride a wild warthog, just like in the very first game. Like in the more recent games in the series, Crash was going to have an upgradable health bar. Judging by some screenshots, this was coupled with the humorous detail of Crash losing his pants after taking too much damage, a la Ghosts and Goblins. Along with some of Crash's iconic moves, he would have retained the ability to climb up certain walls from Mind Over Mutant. Levels were going to be semi-open, akin to Twinsanity, with linear paths to follow and optional areas to explore. Despite the presence of Wumpa fruits in the concept art, Crash was going to collect purple spheres, most likely Mojo, as seen in Crash of the Titans and Mind Over Mutant, suggesting fruits would replenish his health as they did in recent games. There was also going to be a random weather effects, such as rain and day and night cycles. While it's unknown if the weather had any effect on the gameplay, the concept art suggests that Crash would encounter much bigger, tougher enemies at night. Other environmental effects included Crash getting mud all over him or waddling through thick grass. Several totems would be distributed around each island, usually one per major location. Their purpose is unknown, but it is likely they acted as save points like Mind Over Mutant. Unquote. There's also details about several of the islands that Crash would have gone to, with there being 4 major ones, and there's also going to be a Crash racing game spin-off to go alongside this new game and its art style. However, as noted, this game was canned, and Radical Entertainment, or at least the team that was left that was working on Crash Landed, would go on to go work on Prototype 2 instead. While it's not 100% clear as to why it was canned, especially since some of it could have been the developers not having a solid gameplay to showcase, or it could have just been Activision being fucking Activision. All the same, this would result in Crash Mind Over Mutant being the last new Crash game made for the next 8 years, with Activision simply just sitting on the franchise that whole time. In that time, several more pitches would come through, all of which would be turned down, as it seems that Activision and the higher-ups simply did not believe in Crash Bandicoot as a franchise. They seemed to have no confidence in the series whatsoever, and so time after time, pitches, no matter how innovative, interesting, or different, or a return to form, would all be turned down. It's a shame because Crash Landed legit seems like the most interesting take on the franchise by Radical up to this point. No one knows if it would have ended up being good or not, and judging by their other Crash games, I don't have the highest amount of faith in it, but I can say personally, based on the concepts and info that we do know about it, it looks like a much better direction for me personally than either the Titan-based games. It seemed like it would have been a return to form, while also doing some new things. Also, the art style is quite striking and pretty cute, but I suppose we'll never really know for sure how it would have turned out. Both Crash of the Titans and Mind Over Mutant, while selling well, both seem to really divide the fan base. And while looking back now, we can see them as an interesting, if not very flawed experiment with the franchise. For a solid 8 years, these were the final notes the series ended on, a far cry from when the series began, a disappointment to many, and I think that did skew people's perception of them a bit. While the fault for there being no Crash games during that time frame squarely falls onto Activision not having faith in the series, to be perfectly clear, it was still hard not to put some blame on these two games that so radically changed the series. It was a damn bitter note to end. As a longtime Crash fan, I'm gonna admit. For a long time, I looked at the Crash series as something that I really adored and enjoyed, but also sadly ended on a whimper. So much so that I never even played these games till making this retrospective. And to be clear, I have played literally every other one of these games in this series multiple times. Playing through them now, I see some of the cool concepts and ideas at play, and the overall, genuine creativity that went into both of them. I can understand why so many love them both. But gameplay-wise, they do nothing for me, and I find myself sitting and considering how much better these games could have been if they just hadn't been so focused on jacking off Titans instead of making a good combat system. Come to think of it, that's pretty weird, right? Jacking Titans. I never really thought about it before, but Crash's ability in this game is quite literally to assault monsters and then control them. Make them do what he wants. Anything he wants. Not to mention, it's literally called jacking. The core gameplay loop, the whole gimmick of this series, is Crash jacking off big monsters. And actually, come to think of it, there's a lot of humor in these two games about sex, or fetishes, or incest, isn't there? Fuck. I knew there was a reason these games and their character designs reminded me of DeviantArt. We threw away any chance of Crash having an interesting moveset for his ability to assault big monsters, so he can then ride on them after. Crash of the Titans, more like Crash the fucking rapist. Crash Mind Over Mutant, more like Crash Mind My Fat Fucking Orange Cock. You know what? Fuck these DeviantArt fetish demon games. Back to the pits of hell with you. God may forgive you, but I won't. And that is it, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so very, very much for watching. That's yet another Crash Bandicoot game done in this retrospective. That before, we're finally gonna start finishing this thing, so I can also eventually start talking about other video games and do other retrospectives of those video games on the channel without feeling bad because I've neglected this one for so long. The next video, you can expect there to be a little bit of break from the mainline series, since the only one left is Crash 4, and I plan on talking about that game last. So the next one will be covering several of the spin-offs of Crash Bandicoot, the racing games, the party games, and possibly the portable games that may end up being its own separate video. We'll kind of see. But either way, these will come out within a short amount of time. Being said, I hope that you all enjoyed the video. Shout out to anyone who's watching this during the premiere, by the way. You're awesome. And you know who else is awesome? All of my loyal patrons and channel members for continuing to support me and all my future projects, including all of my night eggs and my night owlets, with my great night owls being especially awesome, which include the following: Bandan, Sketch Lombo, Somber Devonte 06, Jeffrey Robery, Hexmaniac Hannah, and Ho Hot. And the most epic and awesome people of them all are of course the Arch Owls, which include the following: the chaotic cartoonist Cherry NGT, the wise Nicodemus, the always Chi Vibes Zen Garden Party, the amazing Ali Elman, the daring Daniel Petrie, the Super Saiyan Star Punch Gaming, the fearless Forgotten Ace, and the Supersonic Sword. Thank you all so very much for your continued support. But with all that being said, until next time, this has been Dylan the Night Owl, flying off.